Well, let me to ask permission to speak in Portuguese. This is not well, this is a recognition that Brazil is really a part of this project. A cooperação, bem, antes de mais nada.
Well, first of all, my name is Osvaldo Moraes, Director for Climate and Sustainability for the Ministry for Science, Technology and Innovation of Brazil. And it is indeed a pleasure to be here having this session focused on Amazon Face in the Brazil Pavilion. I remember that in the Glasgow COP, there was an event about the Amazon Face in the Science Pavilion, and we had the UK Met Office as a host. And that made me feel quite jealous at the time, and I thought that we should recognize Brazil's effort in this project and bring visibility to it in the Brazil Pavilion. The history of science and collaboration between Brazil and the United States is a long-standing one, and particularly when it comes to environment and the Amazon, it's been about 45 years that we've been working together. And the first projects that were carried out between Brazil and the United Kingdom in the Amazon were carried out to investigate the hydrologic cycle and to carry out meteorological observations. And we need to recognize that at that time, when research projects were elaborated in order to do science in the Amazon, the whole scientific agenda was determined and supported by foreign partners from a financial point of view. But that has changed. Amazon Face is a good example. I remember that I was working in the Ministry for Science and Technology the first time that I worked there, and I received the visit of some crazy people that started telling me about the Amazon Face. We have to recognize that all the leaps in science have been taken by crazy people. Science didn't advance with white colors. Science advanced because there were visionary people that were brave enough to think about questions that were difficult to answer. When I talked to Beto for the first time and Davi, they left my room and I immediately thought, oh, these are two crazy guys. This will lead to nowhere. But history changed, happily. And it changed due to the persistence and the belief of these two people that I have the honor to be friends with. They believed that the project could be a success case. The Amazon Face was thought of, designed, and considered by the Brazilian side. And this is a reality that shows how things changed since the 80s. And the partnership with the British colleagues was strategic because when we were facing difficulties leveraging this process on Brazil's side, the British believed in the project and they joined forces with us. So this panel here today won't just describe what the project is, but it is also a recognition to those who invested their time and their dreams in the belief that looking at the Amazon from a multiplicity of perspectives is necessary. And it's also a thank you to our British colleagues for this strategic partnership that we've had for many years. I coordinate a project with the UK Met Office, which is Climate for Science for Service Partnership, which is a 5-year-old collaboration and has brought a lot of fruit. So on behalf of the Ministry for Science, Technology and Innovation, I would like to thank the British for this partnership. And I'd like to say we are very proud to have in Brazil scientists that are still crazy. And this craziness can be translated into how difficult that little project was to build. Bringing a suitcase is difficult. Now imagine bringing a box with that to show you what it represents. This is insanity. So after these initial words, I'd like to offer the floor to Stephen, who is the Climate Research Director for the FCDO, so that he can say a few words about how the British partners see this project.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks to the Brazil. Pardon. Thanks to the Brazil Pavilion for the invite and this partnership approach. It really has been a partnership, and we really appreciate the ministry for allowing us to come here and presenting and bringing the whole team together. As you say, it's a crazy team, crazy ideas, drive it forward. And that partnership and that craziness is really important to us, because this is a groundbreaking experiment that we are committed to delivering and showcasing what is really possible when you take science, when you put a time machine in the middle of the Amazonian rainforest to understand what the potential is in relation to future climate change. It's really driving that evidence approach, which we really think is really important. It's important for us at FCDO, it's important for us for the UK government, and this partnership and this long-term building and this capacity strengthening and this two-way communication is really key in terms of any scientific approach. And I think Amazon Face has really strengthened what we can do in terms of collaboration, in terms of what we can do in terms of relationship building, not just at a kind of at a government to government and a ministry to ministry level, but amongst the researchers as well. So it's great to have like a panel of researchers here from both the UK and in Brazil and the UK Met Office to show how committed we are and to really strengthening that scientific approach. It's something that's quite important to us. We look forward to continuing to engage in Amazon Face. We demonstrated what was possible by our funding, and we were happy to take that forward. But I think what we need to kind of listen to now is how to maintain that kind of that going forward and that research going forward. And it's great to have the commitment of the ministry and IMPA and others to drive that kind of research and that long-term use of the experiment. And I think that sustainability of the experiment is going to be quite important, and to get those research and those evidence and those impacts out there. But you don't want to hear from me as just a policy wonk or a ministry official. I think we really want to hear from like the actual scientists themselves and how that can be, and the exciting science that's taking place. But on behalf of the UK government, thank you very much for the Brazilian Pavilion. Thank you very much to the ministry for the invite. We are committed to this. It's very important. And also there's going to be an event to show this and to show the partnership later on in the UK Pavilion. So this is like a very exciting experiment, and the two events I think show how exciting this is, and we should be shouting from the treetops about how important this science and this crazy experiment and that your ability to deliver is quite amazing. But thank you very much, and thank you to the ministry.
Well, thank you, Stephen. Your word is a recognition that so the cooperation between UK and Brazil is important, and so how, well, como esse projeto é.
Because this project is so important from a scientific point of view, and it is not our role to talk about the science. So I'm going to offer the floor to the people who truly understand that are involved with this project, so that they can give you an idea of what we have envisioned for the Amazon in future scenarios with a high concentration of CO2. Beto, I give you the floor. Beto, if you want to speak English, feel free to. Please,
I guess we go English then, because it's. Could you put the play on, please, for the video? Thank you. Me? Okay. Thank you, Osvaldo. I guess speaking English is probably a good idea because we talk to a broader audience. And first of all, thank you, Osvaldo. Thank the Ministry of Science and Technology for this session to give us the opportunity to show how crazy we are. I guess we'll get this, you know, people call us crazy even more and more along the lines, I think. So thank you, Stephen, for your kind words and for the support as well, for the UK support. Came very importantly at very right time for us and made it all possible and was very, very important. So how crazy we are, I guess the images behind that, it shows a little bit the idea and the concept we work. We tried to put on, I don't know how I can put this back and on again. Yes, okay. We try a question. I think this is the best way to check, is to understand how the Amazon will do in a world that is much hotter, much drier with climate change. You know, and this deals with the question of tipping points, for instance. How the Amazon will behave in the future years with climate change. Is it going to degrade? You know, it's likely. There is a hypothesis that it's what we test in this infrastructure that is perhaps with high CO2 in the atmosphere, with more carbon in the atmosphere that we have been releasing since the 1800s in the Industrial Revolution. The plants that live on carbon, they suck carbon from the atmosphere, they would do better. They would be more resilient. They would be able to get more energy from it and also use water in a better way. So there is this hypothesis that maybe with more carbon in the atmosphere, plants would be more resistant, more resilient to the impact of climate change. And then to test this, because this is assumed for decades, you know, for 40 years, but never tested in a tropical forest. To test this, we had to build those systems, which is represented there in the model and also in the screen over there. This is already in the field in Manaus. We tested this system, which is a set of towers that blow the CO2 on the rainforest at a concentration 50% higher than the atmosphere today. And this is to really get to test this hypothesis of what is the extra carbon do. You know, we are assuming it will do a lot, that we could turn the forest more resilient, it turn the forest more stable, at least for a few more decades, or is it going to a trajectory of degradation and carbon losses and changes in the water cycle, you know, which Angie will talk in a bit. So that's in the center of the whole discussion of how climate change will affect our world. You know, the Amazon is really important, stores a huge amount of carbon, not only storing, but also processing lots of water, energy, carbon, which affects the climate of the entire planet. You know, so I think this is indeed a crazy thing. You know, it's expensive, crazy idea, but it's probably the most important scientific experiment dealing with climate questions nowadays. You know, and it will be really important and strategically to understand what is the trajectory that the Amazon will go, and then we can be prepared to it. You know, we can better know the future. So it's a very important laboratory. It's an open-air lab, and will help us in science very much. You know, it will help inform a lot of what IPCC is doing, what Brazil needs to know as to prepare for the future as well. You know, so I guess I will stop here and pass the ball over to Andy. Otherwise, you know, as a crazy guy, I could be speaking for hours here about that. Thank you. Oh, I didn't say my name, right? Okay. My name is Beto Quezada from the National Institute of Amazonian Research, Brazil.
I
Thanks.
apologize. The fault was mine.
Yeah. Yeah,
Carlos Alberto Quesada.
by all means, everybody knows me by Beto Quezada. Only my mother used to know me as Carlos Alberto, and it meant bad things when she said like this. Sorry.
He is a researcher from the National Institute for Amazon. Well, now I will pass the floor to Andy. Andy is very old friend from the CSSP Brazil, and he is a researcher in the UK Met Office, and he is a member of the scientific committee from the Amazon Face. Please, Andy, it's a pleasure to have you here. We have a meeting in London, in Brazil, in many places, but this is the first place in Dubai. Please, Andy, it's a pleasure to have you here in the Brazilian pavilion.
Thank you very much. I have to say, it's a real honour to be here, amongst my colleagues here, but also my friends. I say it has been quite a long time that we've been working on Brazilian research, not just Amazon Face. And I have to say, I think that partnership has been fantastic and enabled so much to happen. One of the things being Amazon Face, which is fantastic. So I was going to talk a little bit more now about the water cycle, and hopefully what you can see playing behind me, and I hope it is it actually playing? Okay. Okay. Well, hopefully, what this was to show was to show the transport of water in the atmosphere. These are what is sort of known as atmospheric rivers. And this here is actually illustrating the transport of water that you see across the Amazon that heads down south towards the Sao Paulo sort of region. So the Amazon is really important in these kind of global, large-scale cycling and water. And what we know from our Earth system models and things going back is actually this is quite sensitive under climate change. And one of the things where we've touched upon there was about tipping points, how would the Amazon respond? But quite crucially, one of those areas will be around that cycling of water. Now, so what we're seeing happening is as that water sort of being transported across the Amazon, it's raining. Okay, it's been taken back up by the vegetation. It's being evaporated and recycled. So that water is continually being recycled as it makes its transport across the region. Now that's happening by initially the water being taken up through your roots of the plants, taken up, transmitted up through the trees and vegetation, and eventually released out through the plant stomata. So these trees are keeping the stomata open so they can take up CO2. So that's the way they're actually taking up the materials to enable them to grow. Now, under enhanced CO2 or changing CO2, the plants will be able to access that CO2 at higher concentrations. So in some ways, they're able to grow better, and this is what Berto was just talking about. But one of the consequences of that is perhaps they don't have to have their stomata open as much to acquire the CO2 that they need. And in that way, they can actually reduce the amount of water they consume. So that affects what we know as the water use efficiency of the trees. So there's a direct effect from CO2 on the amount of evapotranspiration that we expect to be taking place. And therefore, the effect of how that moisture is then transported across the Amazon region and south to these very populated areas, very dependent on the precipitation for agriculture and many uses. So this is one of the areas we're very interested in, and as I said, we've got our modelling experiments tells us this is quite sensitive. So this brings us to Amazon Face. So this is the experiment by which we can actually go and directly look and understand how we think the vegetation is going to respond to that changing CO2. So at this experiment, we've got some measurements taking place, which are directly looking at the way that the vegetation uses water. So we're measuring the take-up, the flow of water through the vegetation and out the leaves. And when we run fully operational, we'll be able to see the difference it affects. So what role is CO2 having on the use and consumption of water by the vegetation. In turn, we can then use that with our Earth system models to try and understand what the impacts and consequences are that, both for the sort of South American region, but also globally. So this is one of the ways that I think the partnership is potentially quite strong, and that's with between what I do at the Met Office as Earth system modeler, and then bring that together with the modelling expertise and the experimental side that's taken place in Brazil. So from that point of view, it's a huge honour and a privilege to be able to partake in this. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Andy. But before to pass the floor to Adriane, let me to say that when you look at this model or when you look at this movie, it's not possible to understand what is behind that way. So the people needs to open roads in the Amazon. All the infrastructure that are behind that one is not only described by the pictures or by the model. For those that had the opportunity to visit the site, we will understand why I call these people as crazy. Well, Adriane, she is a teacher in the University of Birmingham. She is also a member of the Amazon Face Scientific Committee. And so, Adriane, it's a pleasure to have you here, and the floor is yours.
Obrigada, bom dia. E também sou brasileira.
I'm also Brazilian.
I like that you mentioned a little bit of imagining the scale of this, and I actually wanted to play a little bit of your imagination. I wanted to understand what we imagine when we imagine the Amazon. So we often, when we imagine the Amazon, we imagine a sea of green, or if we've been to the Amazon, we might imagine açaí, tucumã, cupuaçu, or you might imagine a jaguar or a pink river dolphin or a manatee. And all these things that we imagine when we imagine the Amazon, it's an aspect of biodiversity. And this is what I want to talk to you today. It's about biodiversity. And it's the main characteristic of the Amazon. The main thing that makes the Amazon unique, it's the extreme amount of biodiversity that is there. But it's also very important for the resilience of the system. And when we talk about the Amazon and the resilience and the carbon, we often don't mention so much its biodiversity. So I just wanted to briefly talk to you about the importance, but also the challenge that biodiversity brings to us and the opportunity that also you will bring with Amazon Face. So just to give you a sense of the biodiversity in terms of tree species and the challenge that there is, we have around 15,000 tree species across the Amazon. And in the face sites, the plots that we have 394 species. This is not a competition, but it's around 10 times the biodiversity of trees that we find across the whole of the UK, only in these plots. So it's extremely challenging to understand what each species is doing. But it's also extremely important when we study tree mortality, for instance, and tree mortality across the globe, that is fundamental for the emissions that we have in terms of carbon. We see big events of tree mortality in temperate areas, in Europe, in the US. We don't see these big mortality events in tropical systems. And we believe that is because of the high biodiversity that is providing the resilience of these systems. So in Amazon Face, we have an amazing opportunity to go, this is just another beautiful picture, to show the biodiversity within biodiversity. So I'm talking only about trees, but we also have the bromelia, the insects, and everything else. And in Amazon Face, we have this amazing opportunity to study the detail of biodiversity with these cranes. There is the crane that you can see here, that will allow is the first crane in the Amazon that will allow us to understand the detail of how each species is responding, the stomata of each species, how differently it responds. And this, when you scale up, when you put this in mathematical models that at the moment cannot capture biodiversity, we'll be able to then project the Amazon in the future. So Amazon Face will transform this critical challenge to an opportunity to understand how Amazon forest is responding to climate change. This is a critical step for science, a critical step for Amazonian studies, for tropical forest studies, but also a critical step for our planet. Because when you think about the future of our planet, you're thinking about the future of Amazon forests, but also all the Amazon biodiversity that is there. So I just want to highlight the importance of biodiversity for understanding Amazonian forests. Yeah, there's a video.
Thank you, Adrian. Before to pass the floor to David, let me to call the attention for one, from my point of view, one important point. The previous studies in the Amazon was to understanding what is the role of the Amazon as a driver of the climate and the regional and the global climate. The question here is a little bit different. What is the impact of the climate in the Amazon? So we change the eyes when you are looking the question in the Amazon face. Davi, my good friend, crazy, the floor is yours.
Obrigado, Osvaldo. Bom dia.
Thank you, Osvaldo. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. I'm Davi Lapola.
I'm Davi Lapola. I'm a researcher at the University of Campinas in the state of São Paulo, Brazil.
I'll leave the thanks session to the end. So we shouldn't forget that inside these plots here, the video that Beto was showing, we want to test how the forest can endure climate change, how it will react to CO2. And it's not difficult for us, especially this year in the Amazon. We have a severe drought there. It's not difficult to think that this has a relevance for people. This has a socioeconomic relevance for different socioeconomic sectors. Let me give you an example. And this image here is just illustrating my speech here. From the nearly 400 species that Dri mentioned that occur inside the 6 plots like this we're going to have in the experiment, we have found out in the socioeconomic task of Amazon Face that approximately 60% of all these nearly 400 species, they have already a previously registered use by humans in the literature. So what is going to happen to each of these species that are used by humans? So that's the connection we try to make in this socio-economic, socio-environmental part of Amazon Face, this nexus between ecological processes, how they are affected by elevated CO2, climate change, and how they affect this change in the forest, how it affects the provision of ecosystem services. So it can be ecosystem services of what I call direct beneficiaries, people that are there close to the forest that benefit from services like fruit harvesting, açaí, for example. Or it can be services of indirect beneficiaries like global climate regulation by keeping the carbon stored there. And I tell you, so it's also easy to think that this has also a political relevance. Why we are doing this? Why putting so much money in an experiment like that? We should think, I think what the world wants, the answer from this experiment, a good answer, let's say a good outcome of it would be that we say in 10 years from now, because we have to run this experiment for a relatively long time to see changes. Everybody wants us to say after 10 years that the forest is storing more carbon in stable compartments of the ecosystem, like trunks. But it can be that the lack of nutrients will not allow that scenario for us, and all the carbon entering the system will go out via soil respiration, for example, that changes a lot the perspective, the political perspective of how much we can rely on these forests to save us from climate change. But as Osvaldo also said, we shouldn't forget that these forests, sometimes we tend to look at these forests only as the saviors for us. These forests, the Amazon forest, other tropical forests are gonna save us from climate change. But we shouldn't forget that they are also subject to climate change. They are also victims to climate change. And if we don't find this strong, persistent CO2 fertilization effect inside these plots, the perspective is more pessimist to the Amazon in light of climate change. So I would conclude here, because we wanted to allow a sufficient time for interaction with you, but I wanted to conclude that there is also, while we are looking for the resources to guarantee the provision of CO2, the long-term provision of CO2, which is expensive, but sine qua non condition for the experiment. We are also intending to, increase the level of science we do in Brazil, in the Amazon. And this is a 3D artwork of a new research station we want to build there. We are also looking for the funding to materialize this new research station there that could receive courses, students from other parts of the Amazon, other Amazonian countries, and also other continents. With that, I think we conclude here. I want to thank the Brazilian Pavilion, MCTI, for the space provided, for all the support, FCDO as well. We're going to have the event in the afternoon, as Stephen told us. And I shouldn't forget to thank all the very dedicated people that are there in Manaus, in other parts of Brazil, and have been working hard, managers, technicians, students, have been working very hard to make this a reality. Thank you.
Thank you, Davi. And I clearly understood your last message, asking for new funds. It was so clear. And the message was, was understood. Well, we have now time for questions. The guys are crazy, but they obey the time that you have in advance. And so you have now some time available for, well, you have 30 minutes for question or for any point that you need to call the attention. Well, please.
My name is Claudia Antunes. I'm a journalist. I was curious to know where this experiment is based in, actually in the Amazon, and in how much time. You mentioned 10 years. You have some of the answers, and yes, this is it. And if it will measure only the result of the greater concentration of carbon, or if it will measure as well the consequences of the degradation coming from deforestation and other,
Well, who is...
Okay, I can give some answers and maybe others can complement. Thank you, Claudia, for your question. The experiment is located in Manaus, about 70 kilometers away from the capital, from the city, in an INPA research station there. So the idea, if I understood everything you want to know, is to understand the impact of elevated CO2 we'll have in the forest. We are not dealing directly with any questions about forest degradation or suppression of any kind. Did I answer everything? Yeah? Okay. Okay, no, that's very, thank you. That's a very nice point. Some of the things we are looking for, in an experiment like that, you have to look at every single thing that could change and that eventually, would cascade down in the ecosystem and, end up in big results, in big changes, right? So we have to look from the highest leaf in the tree to the very fine root in the soil, trying to understand the relationships with microbes, with everything. So it's really a very strong ecosystem level experiment that we have to look at all that. Some of these aspects change in 20 minutes. Like photosynthesis, in the moment you have high CO2 in the atmosphere, photosynthesis will change immediately. Water use efficiency will change immediately. Okay, but to understand how this permeates the system, how this will actually balance out in the ecosystem processes, we have to look at long time. So some results will come out very quickly, some of, preliminary results, preliminary impacts that we can scale up, but others will have to take very long time so we can really understand the impact. That's why we need to run for 10 years. For instance, we can imagine a scenario where roots and leaves are produced faster and the system becomes more productive, but will this turn out to be more wood, for instance, or the wood will stay the same and the system will be productive in temporary tissue only? So these are important questions that we need the CO2 provision for, which is expensive. So if someone has a big pocket and want to help the experiment, is welcome. So we need to look at least 10 years, to be able to understand. We so far have funding for building the infrastructure, the entire 6 plots, and to do some science and do some testing. We are bidding for money for CO2.
Just to complete the answers from Carlos Alberto, we applied now for funding from the national FNDCT for the next years. Of course, the budget to keep the CO2 is nowadays the challenge for us. And after that, we need to have one new building to support all the research related with the Amazon fence. And as you know, during long time, the FNDCT, the amount of researches for FNDCT was so small. And nowadays, the demand for the number of projects applied for the FNDCT is so high. But you hope that you can get funding to support the Amazon phase for the next years. I think that he also, well, before to pass the floor for other participants, perhaps should be important to say how is challenged to keep the density of the CO2 in homogeneous conditions inside the plot. You can have your question, how do you are considering to keep the concentration of CO2 homogeneous during the time? Not only the space, but space and time. This is a so big challenge that also is another critical condition to have good results in this project. But Mariana?
Hi, good morning. I'm Mariana Valle from the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro and the Rede Clima. And there is a lot of debate about the Amazon reaching a tipping point associated with deforestation and climate change. I would like to know what is the state of the science about that? What do we still miss in terms of information to be able to have a better clarification on that issue? Thank you.
Well, before to pass the floor for the answers, let me to say that in this afternoon, we will have another panel here to try to address these questions. Please.
Okay, thank you. Maybe I'll take the opportunity to advertise another partnership that we have, which is called CSSP Brazil, which is involves everyone here. Is microphone working? Yeah. Oh, sorry. So that's another program we've got between us, and actually we're looking at some of those other issues as well. We maybe talked about there around deforestation and forest degradation, but also the broader point around climate change and how that might drive potential tipping points in the forest. So I just wanted to flag there is a broader collaboration we have going on here. But what's really important about Amazon Face is one of those real uncertainties we have is how that forest is going to respond to the CO2. And that uncertainty really sits in all our modeling experiments and projections we do. So actually, Amazon Face is really coming to help us understand what those risks are for tipping points and things. So we will bring all this together with the modeling, okay, to try and improve our understanding of the future risks and consequences of ongoing climate change.
I just want to do an advert as well. We are launching a policy brief on Amazon tipping points this afternoon with the science panel for the Amazon. And just to add on this, what we're missing. So tipping points is a lot about the interactions between different drivers, temperature and rainfall. And as Andy said, is one of the things is how the forest will respond to added CO2. Because what we expect is with more CO2, the forest will need, the plants will potentially transpire less, which might aggravate the problem of transportation of water across the Amazon. But they might also allow for sinking more carbon, which would then have an effect on the temperature, on global warming. So that's a very fundamental component for any understanding of Amazonian tipping points, in addition to deforestation, degradation, and other drivers. And basically, we have no idea of what's going to happen. So it's actually the missing piece there that we're going to find out. But again, it will vary across species, and that's something that we need to know for the Amazon.
I'll take the liberty of adding my own opinion about that. It should be clear that the first paper that ever mentioned the Amazon forest dieback was published in 1999, so more than 20 years ago, and it was an effect that occurred in a model due to climate change only, and not deforestation or degradation. Later on, it was translated to savanization of the Amazon, and nowadays it's called tipping point, the Amazon tipping point. And the thing about degradation and deforestation came later, and as I understand it, it would be a catalyzer of the tipping point. If you have, even though there isn't such a certainty about the level of deforestation you would need for crossing that tipping point. But the bad news is there are models from CEMIP 6 still showing that even if you stop deforestation and degradation at all, there are certain extreme scenarios where you could have the tipping point happening in the same way. And the major uncertainty regarding that is the CO2 fertilization effect. That's why this experiment is so needed, to reduce this key uncertainty about the future of the Amazon in light of climate change.
Well, please.
Is why we've kind of really tried to kind of committed to funding in partnership with the ministry and impact like this research to really understand what the uncertainty is. It should be the science and the evidence that drives this understanding. And without the science and the evidence, we're simply in an area of uncertainty that we don't know. And I think the link between understanding what is actually happening on the ground, the link to the global models, improving the modeling, and that value chain is really what is driving and what really puts aside Amazon Face to the other some of the experiments that are taking place, not just in relation to tipping points, but cascading and compounding risks. And those cascading and compounding risks might even be more relevant than the tipping points that we need to take into consideration. So looking at the water trajectory, looking at how it moves around the system, and understanding what those dynamics are. But without the fundamental research this is doing across a broad suite, I think we're just living in an area of uncertainty, and we need to have these experiments and this groundbreaking experiment, and for running for a long time, and for it to be sustainable and to be based on partnership, to get these outputs to understand what the mechanics are going forward. And that's why we funded it, that's why we want to work in partnership, and that's why we need more funding and more sustainable funding to drive this research going forward.
Well, thank you. Please, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much. So I'm Richard Jones from the Met Office Hadley Centre. So I've got a couple of questions. One on the details of the observations you're doing. You're talking about the impact of the elevated CO2 on stromatal conductance, and therefore on the hydrological cycle. And you're saying you're doing detailed measurements of that within the plots. I'd be just really interested to hear a bit more about just how you're doing those measurements of what's going on in terms of the local hydrological cycle within the plot. So that's one question. The second question, which is sort of relates a bit more onto the tipping points, is are you looking at the value of the observations that you are making here in terms of linking it with satellite observations, Earth observations, and using this to ground truth some of the Earth observations, so you can use satellite data to get a handle on, essentially to extrapolate from what you're doing very detailed here across the whole of the forest?
Who?
Okay. Thank you, Richard. Yeah, some really interesting questions there. So actually, one of for me, the really exciting bits about Amazon facing this bigger experiment is we are bringing together lots of different disciplines here. So we do have the field experimentalists, the people who are specialists in doing the observations and the measurements, and we're bringing them together with numerical modelers. We're also bringing in, as you mentioned, people who work on remote sensing, people who maybe work on global systems and those kind of understandings. And actually what we are trying to do is bring all those people together to work so we can make the best of those observations and really pull them through into using the models there with the remote sensing. The specific bit about observations, as you can see, we've got the crane there, okay, and that's one of the really key things here. So we can actually access the full canopy. So there will be a kind of a program of observation in which detailed measurements will be made at the leaf level to try and understand the actual stomatal changes and comparing them plot to plot. We'll also be measuring sap flow up through the tree, so we will see exactly how much moisture is being transported through there. So we will be trying to close that water budget within the plots as best we can. That's probably enough on the detail.
I just wanted to add again that we are characterizing the different species that we have in the plots in terms of their functional traits and their functionality. So we can then use this information of the transport of water and the stomatal conductance, link that to functional groups that can allow us then to model this forest as well. And this is very valuable when you're thinking about scaling up for the whole Amazon. Because I believe that at this point, to scaling up with satellite images, we're not quite there yet, because you need the species level information for doing that, and then you need potentially multispectral products to be able to actually do that properly. But that could be a next step, and in 10 years' time, we might be at the point that we can use satellite images to do that scaling up. At the moment, the modeling component is the way forward in terms of scaling up for the whole Amazon.
Por favor, Moacir.
Moacir Araújo from the Brazilian Research Network on Global Climate Change, Rede Clima. I'd like to listen to hear you about how hard it is to understand the behavior of each on the component of this experiment. I mean, we have so many interconnections between species, from microorganisms to primates, that are going to they walk through the Amazon face, and I suppose that it's really hard to understand what's going on with all these rich ecosystems, species, and so on. And how do you deal with that? How do you face with that?
Yeah, I guess we all have something to say about that. Thanks for your question. It is indeed quite a challenge. You can imagine how complex the Amazon is, right? And diversity is huge, ecological processes, all interconnected in different ways. It is difficult to answer this question, but it's also a challenge, and it's an opportunity. And what we want to know is actually how the CO2 and how it permeates. It gets into the leaves and then it permeates down to the microbes in the soil and to the bees flying around. It is a crazy thing. That's why Osvaldo calls us crazy, because the way we treat the question is we really get to know everything that will go on there. In comparing on the forest how it is now, so we have baseline data and we have the treatment, but also we have the controls, so we kind of use the forest itself as a control, the trees itself that are being exposed to CO2. We look at them before and look at them after, and we also look at the controls. So this is a nice strategy. It helps to find very tiny changes. But I guess the main response for your question is we need an army of scientists looking at it, from all the different disciplines you can imagine. I am a soil scientist myself. I am interested to understand what a root is doing in the soil, how it's relating to the microbes, to the mycorrhizae, to the soil water, to the nutrients, how it changes its enzyme functionality to acquire more nutrients that are not available. It's quite likely that soil nutrients will limit all the responses in the forest unless the CO2 can be used to trigger, having more carbon in the system, have more fuel. The trees could just change the way they get nutrients, make more roots, or give more carbon to the mycorrhiza, and then everything starts up and it's connected. So you need lots of crazy scientists that will look at every different box. And I think one of the most magic things in this experiment is that we do this all at one place, at one time, together. So I think it's the most studied rainforest in the world, and it's also the most integrated one. You have forests that are people studying in Panama, for instance, in the Smithsonian Station for many decades, but they don't do anything connected. Amazon Face, we try to do everything as connected as possible, trying to understand the whole network of changes. It is a challenge, and that's why he calls me crazy.
No, that's not true. You are not crazy by the... No, that's not crazy for the scientific question. For the scientific question, you are visionary. You are crazy, but you try to put the infrastructure in such a place, okay? For the scientific question, scientific point of view, you are much more than crazy. You are visionary. You have time for more questions, please.
Thank you so much for the presentation. Laura Pereira from the Global Change Institute at Wits University in South Africa. 2 questions. The first is actually on the biodiversity composition, and just wondering whether you have any hypotheses in terms of whether some species will react better to carbon dioxide fertilization and what that impact might have in terms of the resilience that you were talking about. And the second is whether, we're talking about scaling up some of these data for the Amazon region, but whether any of these findings might also be comparable for other regions, thinking the Congo in particular, where we are definitely not getting this kind of funding to run these sorts of long-term experiments? Thanks.
Thanks for your question. It's a very important question, actually. We have a few hypotheses in terms of which species are gonna, different species are gonna respond, and they come from observations across the Amazon, but also from theory. So one of the hypotheses is that the fast-growing species, the pioneer ones, are going to do better because they respond faster to increasing CO2. And if that's the case and that translates into a change in composition across the basin, that has consequences for how much carbon the forest can store. So actually, when we scale that information from the local site up on the different, how different species respond, that could have very big consequences in terms of how much carbon it can be stored in the future in the Amazon. Another hypothesis, a competing hypothesis, is that the big trees, the ones who dominate the canopy, are the ones that are going to do better with the hypothesis that winners take all. They already have more access to water and light, so they might do better. In that case, the situation is completely different because they store a lot more carbon. If they are doing better and they can live for longer, then the Amazon itself is going to potentially store more carbon. So I think that gives you a sense of how the species component is important here. And on the question on other tropical forests, this is critical here because we are trying to understand processes. And these processes should be able to be translated to other tropical forests. So although it's one location in the Amazon, the processes are potentially very similar across different forests, and we need to understand them here so we can then calibrate the models for other places as well.
Any other questions? Well, please.
Thank you. I'm Helen from the Met Office as well. I was with you at COP26 and stood convening the panel. Here we are at COP28. COP26, we didn't know what was going to happen next. We had a vision, but nothing else. COP28, we've got 2 plots. What's your vision for COP30 when we're hosted in Brazil? Where will we be then? Either crazy or visionary, I don't mind, but it would be interesting to hear from the panel where you think we'll be by COP30.
I hope that they survive until there.
Sorry, and just jumping on the fact that we have the microphone, so adding a question. So, bom dia a todas e todos. Eu sou diretor de clima.
Good morning. I am responsible for climate, and I'm from the United Kingdom, living in Brazil.
Concentration. So I see this as the time machine looking forward, but actually there is a history here. So what degree can we already see some of the things that are happening in the past?
No, answering, thanks for the question, Helen. In a very straight answer, I would say we're going to have first results for COP30. I mean, the full experiment will be up and running, and first preliminary results will be available. Perhaps the first papers published, especially on those ecological processes that react faster, like Beto was saying. But for other processes that react slower, and by the way, our process, we are pretty much interested, the world is interested, like the storage of carbon in trunks, we might have to wait a little longer. But the idea is that at COP30, we show the full experiment operating and first results published.
I would jump in quickly, just saying, okay, COP26, it was a promise. We are very excited. Now, 2 years later, we have 2 entire face rings there in the Amazon. And to do that, as Osvaldo said, we had to make roads. We have to go from the scratch and do the plannings and things. So we acquired a lot in 2 years. It's not a simple thing to build this there in the Amazon. It's probably the most challenging logistics in the planet, or one of. So we managed a lot. We are underway to complete all the 4 plots as well. So the experiment is a total of 6. We have all the bases done there. The towers are being constructed, you know, so the canopy cranes are, the remaining canopy cranes are going there. They are on the way, on the road right now. So by the end of this year, we have the experiment standing and testing. And we hope, as David said, to already have some first results when we get to COP30. So on the way to COP30, we have a lot to do. And we'll be able to get there with some initial responses that are essential, in my opinion, I guess in the scientific community opinion, for the discussions in COP, you know, and see where we go. You know, I think this is a very important point that we need to make. Answer my friend Richard, what we have seen in terms of effect of CO2 in the past, right? So it was, before Industrial Revolution, I think it was 360 parts per million of CO2 in the air. Now it's 420 already? It was 280. Okay, so I need to get my math right. So we do already have an increment, a strong increment. And if we look to the past of what has been happening in the Amazon, I quote here data from a network of permanent plots in the Amazon that is led by UK, by the University of Leeds, where I did my PhD, where Adriani also did her PhD. There is a network of plots across the 9 Amazon countries and monitoring forests since the 70s. So this is also a very important data set that shows us what is the trajectory of the Amazon through time. And what the data measured in the ground by these plots show is that the Amazon was not in equilibrium. You know, it showed several important things, like the Amazon is different everywhere you go. And then it showed that our classic theory about rainforest was wrong. We believed that the rainforest was in equilibrium, you know, like gaining biomass, losing biomass, but always more or less in the same level. And what rainfall data set showed was that the forests were gaining biomass. They were removing from the atmosphere the equivalent, the Amazon rainforest itself, only the Amazon, were removing from the atmosphere equivalent to the emissions of all cars in the planet every year. So it wasn't in equilibrium. There was a stimuli there, you know, so it was sequestering carbon from the atmosphere. But then later research started to show that this capacity was declining. And it was in 2015 approaching to equilibrium. You know, so it means that Amazon was losing the capacity to respond to climate change. Is it going towards degradation? We don't know. You know, we need more data. We need more of this type of data that puts in context with the past, and we need to know what is the effect of high CO2 on this. Is this going to bounce back again? And you have more Amazon productive, you know, sequestering carbon, doing this ecosystem service that it has been doing for free for decades? Or is it going to collapse? You know, it's right there in the trajectory. We don't know. And this is one of the reasons this is really important, because it's a time machine. It's a window for the future. So we can actually predict where the Amazon is going. Because history is telling us it's going declining, you know, the capacity. So it could be near equilibrium, it could be degradation. It could be that with high CO2, it bounces back again. We really don't know. And our models, our best models, the most efficient, accurate models we have in the planet, are assuming that there is this high CO2 effect, which was never tested in a tropical forest. You know, so it could be that we don't know what's going on. We really need this running and operating so we can know where we're going.
Osvaldo, I just wanted to suggest we keep these last minutes for people to come forward and see the...
Okay, but just to close this section, I want to complete the answer regarding the future of this project. I am doing science in Brazil for a long time, and I know how difficult is to do science in Brazil. How difficult is to keep the budget, to keep the people, to keep young scientists working. And the role of us in MCTI now is to put all of energy that we have to bring science as the main part of the Brazil decision. And I have here Tanara, that is a subsecretary for the Amazon question in MCTI, and we are working together to keep this this project working, and present in the Belém COP much good results and more complete results that you have nowadays. Thanks a lot, and if you want to take pictures in these models, feel free, okay? Thank you a lot for that.
Eu queria só falar uma coisa.
Osvaldo, I just wanted to say something.
If you were curious about how we built these from scratch in the Amazon forest, come to our event at 5:30 today at the UK Pavilion, where you can see a video of how we did that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Well, I also hope to see you here in this pavilion at the same time, because you have here one panel that are discussing the impact of climate change in the Amazon, okay? But this is a good opportunity. It's much better to have much more than one panel that doesn't have any panel. Thank you.